Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for MiltonRose Learning with another Let's Learn lesson on the opening Blitzkriegs of World War II, 1939 to 1940. Okay, so we're really excited with this one, so we're going to be kicking off our World War II series today. And we will look first at the context and the causes, what was, as the chess pieces were moving around the board in Europe, what was kind of driving the start of World War II. Then we'll give you a really good chronology, which you can then use to beef up your notes in your history books. We'll look at a key turning point as well of Dunkirk, I think it is. We'll have a look at that as well. And then we will look at the primary, secondary and tertiary significance of these opening blitzkriegs as World War II kind of exploded onto the scene. Okay then, so without further ado, let's dive in, everyone. So the context and the causes, what was kind of happening just before World War II kind of kicked off and what was driving the start of World War II? Well, there's many things, to be honest, but I think we have to isolate as historians. We have to kind of zoom in on what we think are the most significant. So the first one was new ways of fighting wars. So interwar military doctrines were changing. Now, doctrines are basically the rules of how an army fights, basically. And in between the war, after World War I, which has been a trench warfare nightmare, military minds started to look at other ways of fighting wars. So France kind of had one doctrine. They had a Maginot Line strategy. So France invested very heavily in static border fortifications, and they expected a slow defensive war of attrition, just like World War I in some ways. So that their military doctrine hadn't really developed. However, the Germans were more intelligent, I've got to say, in this era. When they were developing their military doctrines. So they said, no, we're not going to do trench warfare again because we lost, obviously. So they developed via officers such as Heinz Guderian, and there were British practitioners of this as well at the time, but they developed a doctrine called Blitzkrieg. So basically it's fast-moving mechanized Panzer divisions, which are basically tanks, motorized infantry and close air support, the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, all working together in combined arms to punch their way through lines very, very quickly. And you can, for visual learners, you can just get a little feel for that. That's kind of a visual representation of Blitzkrieg. Tanks and aircraft and everything moving together as one, okay, to hit the enemy as hard as you can to avoid trench warfare, effectively. So Blitzkrieg was definitely one big change that was driving these opening Blitzkriegs and the new military doctrine. Number two, then, the chess pieces in Europe were moving around the board. So strategic geopolitics and alliances. So in August 1939, you can see the German foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and the Russian leader Joseph Stalin looking very happy with themselves. They just signed a non-aggression treaty, even though ideologically they hated each other's guts. And it secretly divided Poland amongst themselves when Germany attacked and removed the immediate threat of a two-front war for Nazi Germany. So it was a diplomatic masterstroke, to be honest, but it was very, very nefarious, as it always was with Hitler. So there was that Nazi-Soviet pact that was a kind of prelude to the war. Also Anglo-French guarantees. So Britain and France formally guaranteed, Britain especially, guaranteed Polish sovereignty, committing to declare war if Germany invaded, because they'd had enough of, obviously, after the Munich agreement, which was torn up by Hitler and things like this. So Britain finally drew a line in the sand, and World War II was coming. Then, obviously, it kicks off, as we probably know now, in a quite famous image there of moving the border fences from Poland. The outbreak of war then. So the invasion of Poland was in September 1939. Rapid German armoured thrusts and airstrikes crushed Polish resistance very quickly within about 4 weeks. And Poland is quite a big country, to be fair, but it shows the power of the Blitzkrieg doctrine in action. And then we have, after that, you have the phony war where nothing really happened. So Western allies were mobilised, but they remained very passive behind the Maginot Line. And it gave Germany months to regroup and then plan their attack in the West. Okay, so that's kind of some of the context behind the opening blitzkriegs of World War II. Let's now give you a little bit more to go on and to chew on in terms of a chronology. Okay, so first off then, September, October 1939, the Polish campaign. So yeah, let's unpick that. So it was the debut of Blitzkrieg. No one had ever seen this new way of war. So coordinated assaults of Stuka dive bombers, as you can see in the image there, they were terrifying to Allied soldiers at the start of the war. Motorized infantry and Panzers shattered Polish communications and encircled frontline defences. They were too quick. You didn't have any time to react. They were behind you before you even had time to know where they were. So it was a very, very effective blitzkrieg assault. The Soviets invaded on the 17th of September, so the Red Army struck from the east of Poland under the secret terms. There was a secret protocol in the Nazi-Soviet pact, and it basically sealed Poland's fate. So you've got they were sandwiched between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. Really, really dreadful kind of event in history. And the fall of Warsaw. So despite fierce resistance, the Poles did fight extremely bravely, it must be said. But the capital surrendered on the 27th of September, my birthday, leading to the full partition of Poland between Germany and the USSR. Okay, so Poland was basically, totally severed and split amongst these two kind of rapacious nations. Then what happened? Okay, well, the terror continues, to be honest. So April 1940, Hitler didn't really sit on his hands, so there was an invasion of Denmark, mainly for foodstuffs and things like that, and Norway. So Germany launched Operation Weserübung, which was the invasion of kind of Norway, but it was primarily to protect as well Swedish iron ore routes, which shipped via the port of Narvik, which is in Norway. Sweden provided a lot of iron ore throughout the majority of the war to Nazi Germany, and they really needed the iron ore to build tanks and aircraft and things like that. So they actually invaded Norway next door to protect their Swedish kind of iron ore. Also Atlantic submarine bases, so conquering Norway gave the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy in World War II, key forward operating bases so they could then launch out into the Atlantic and start sinking British ships to try and starve Britain out again. Very much similar to World War I, there's their strategy there. And the fall of Chamberlain, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, he falls on the 10th of May. So military failure triggered the Norway debate, and that ultimately forced Chamberlain out. And who comes into office? Winston Churchill. Okay, a very consequential figure for the remainder of the war. Then on the same day that Chamberlain leaves office, actually, Germany struck west. Okay, and it was a brilliant operation. It was planned by in my opinion, Hitler's greatest general, Erich von Manstein. And he had a brilliant idea of striking the French, not through the Maginot Line, because obviously you're going to lose too many men, so through the Ardennes forest. Okay, and you can see in the image there, the Allies didn't think the Panzers could go through the forest, but Manstein had other ideas. And he comes up with a plan called the Sickle Cut plan, like a sickle, like a curved assault through the Ardennes and through Belgium, and will go round the Maginot Line. So German panzer divisions bypass the Maginot Line by passing through the Ardennes forest on the 10th of May. So yeah, a stunning operation. Crossing the Meuse, so on the 13th of May, Heinz Guderian, a panzer general, forced bridgeheads across the Meuse River at Sedan, breaking the French defensive lines. Again, a catastrophic defeat for the British and the French. And the race to the Channel, the 20th of May, armoured spearheads reach Abbeville on the coast, and they end up trapping 400,000 Allied troops in the north, French and British troops. So Blitzkrieg has done absolutely brilliantly here. It was a new way of war, and the Germans are absolutely in the ascendancy. And then it brings us to May to June 1940, we have Dunkirk, the Dunkirk operation, and the fall of France. So let's unpick that And a very famous photo there of German troops marching down the Champs-Élysées in Paris. So Operation Dynamo, 26th of May to the 4th of June. So the Royal Navy sent vessels and civilian little ships, any ships we could lay our hands on, to evacuate 338,226 Allied soldiers from Dunkirk. It was a miracle of an operation. It really, really was, to get those soldiers off the beach and get them back to Britain before they're wiped out by the Nazi forces. Nevertheless, though, the German Blitzkrieg continued. So the fall of Paris occurred on the 14th of June 1940. So Paris was left undefended. It was a free city, and they just marched in, and it broke French political resolve because their capital was taken and they didn't really have much fight left. And there was an armistice on the 22nd of June then. So France surrendered at Compiègne, which was ironically, or not ironically, it was the same place where the armistice was signed in World War I. Hitler wanted to get his own back, so he made France sign the armistice in the same carriage that Germany had to sign the armistice for World War I. 60% of French territory was occupied, and Hitler left southern France to the Vichy regime, which was basically a fascist collaborationist regime in the south of France. So the Germans are winning all ends up at the moment. They were very, very much in the ascendancy. What was the turning point? Well, I think quite interestingly here, I think the breakthrough at Sedan, because that basically was like a dagger at the throat of France, and it showed these blitzkrieg tactics to be unbelievably effective. But I think for the longer term, I think the Dunkirk evacuation. So Guderian's armour crossed the Meuse at Sedan, collapsing the Allied front line in days. I think that's very, very important. But I think Dunkirk is a more important turning point because it was the survival of the British Army. The rescue at Dunkirk kept Britain in the war and denied Hitler a swift negotiated peace. And you can kind of see, for the visual learners, kind of what it was like on Dunkirk. We were just waiting around, waiting desperately for our ships to get the soldiers off the beach. It was horrendous. It was very, very difficult, but we managed it, and that was the nucleus of the British Army, which would then return in D-Day in 1944. So effectively, I do think that was a turning point, and it was one of Hitler's first mistakes not to wipe out the British Army on the beaches of Dunkirk. A big strategic error there, in my opinion. So those are the opening blitzkrieg moves of Germany in World War II. Very, very effective. So let's now just round off by looking, well, what was the significance of these blitzkriegs? What kind of was the broader significance for the war? Well, in terms of tertiary significance, they're not very important ones, but still fairly important. There was a geopolitical realignment and total war escalation. So as we can see there, Italy entered the war. So Mussolini, who was the dictator of Italy at the time, you can see him in the image there, looking very, very stern. He ends up declaring war on Britain and France in June 1940, and that expands the conflict into the Mediterranean. So it gets more kind of intense. Also, it cemented Churchill's war leadership, so British resolved to fight for total victory. And Churchill, who was a brilliant war leader, it must be said, prepared the nation for the Battle of Britain and for the Blitz, in a way that no other figure could have galvanised Britain. Chamberlain was a spent force in this period, and there were also appeasers such as Lord Halifax, who actually wanted to end the war and make peace with Hitler. So we were fairly lucky in some senses that Churchill's war leadership came to the fore after these blitzkriegs. Then secondary significance of these blitzkriegs, there was a revolution in modern mechanized warfare here. So there was an end to static trench tactics. We're not going to be fighting the Great War again. It disproved static defensive doctrines. Blitzkrieg was in the ascendancy. Speed, combined arms and radio communications became essential. This would be a new way of war. I can't overemphasize that. And there was an expansion of war fronts as well. It forced Britain especially to shift our strategic focus now to protecting the Atlantic sea lanes so we don't starve to death, Mediterranean air bases, because we knew Mussolini would be starting to nibble away now at the British Empire holdings in North Africa, and basically forced Britain to refocus its energies strategically into other fronts. But in terms of primary significance here, let's talk about this, and we'll look at that map in a second. So it brought about, these opening blitzkriegs brought about total German domination of continental Europe. So there was a total collapse of the Western balance of power, because within 6 weeks Hitler had achieved total control of Western Europe in a stunning operation, capturing vast industrial, naval and agricultural resources. Germany was winning here very, very, they had a strong hand at the start, and it was a complete isolation of Britain. So the British Empire was left standing pretty much entirely alone against the Axis powers without a major European continental ally. This was a strategic emergency for the British Empire, probably the most threat we've ever been under in terms of British history. And let's round off just by looking at that map. You can get a really nice visual representation. Germany had conquered all the way into Poland. Austria was the Anschluss, so they'd actually swallowed that up. All of the Balkans were kind of subservient allies. Italy was an ally as well, although albeit a weak one. And you can see, can't you, they had conquered pretty much everywhere that they needed to in the first opening moves. If it was a chess match, they've almost taken your queen, let's put it that way. So they were in an extremely strong position, and you can see Britain there alone, basically, and desperately fighting for their lives. Okay, so there you go. Quite a breathless kind of let's learn lesson there, but gives you a really good insight into the opening blitzkriegs of World War II and the stunning kind of victories that Germany achieved at the start of the war before we were able to turn the tide. So hopefully you've enjoyed that lesson. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss another Let's Learn video again. Keep your eyes peeled for our next instalment of the World War II series. And it just remains to say, obviously, thanks for listening. Take care and we'll see you soon.